Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going deep, really deep into some fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking Sigmund Freud
Ooh, Freud.
and happiness.
Mm.
Now, you might be thinking, Freud? Happiness? Didn't he spend all his time analyzing dreams and talking about the unconscious?
Yeah, he did. He did.
Huh.
But he also had some really interesting, some really insightful things to say about, happiness.
Okay, so we all know, I think,
Yeah.
Freud is the sort of the father of psychoanalysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Famous for all those theories on the unconscious mind, all that.
Exactly.
But what did this legendary and, let's be honest, sometimes kind of intimidating figure, what did he have to say about finding happiness?
Right.
I mean, is that even something he thought about?
Well, it's interesting because Freud might not be the first person you think of when you think about happiness,
Right.
but he did have some compelling ideas about it. And what's so fascinating is that he was actually a bit of a pessimist.
Oh, okay.
He believed that true, pure happiness was pretty much impossible to achieve.
So wait a minute. If he didn't believe in happiness, why are we even talking about him?
Because, and here's where it gets really interesting,
Yeah.
he did offer guidance on how to get as close as possible to happiness.
Okay.
He understood that human experience, I mean, it's full of tension, right?
I
We
see.
crave pleasure,
Yeah.
but life throws us curveballs constantly.
Yeah.
He wasn't focused on chasing some constant state of bliss.
Yeah.
It was more about how do we navigate those inevitable ups and downs.
Oh, I see.
And in that, he offers some surprisingly relevant advice for us today.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is a deep dive worth taking.
Oh,
So how did Freud suggest we even approach happiness if we can't actually achieve it?
well, he started with a very simple premise, the pleasure principle.
Okay.
It's basically, we're all wired to seek out the good things and avoid the bad things, right?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense on the surface.
Pretty straightforward.
We all want to feel good. We want to avoid pain. But if it were that simple, I feel like we would all be skipping through life, on cloud nine all the time.
You would think.
And just not that way.
And Freud knew it wasn't that straightforward.
Right.
He recognized that there's this constant tension between, our desire for pleasure and the reality of our limitations.
Okay.
And that is where his famous trio, the id, ego, and superego come in.
Okay, the Freudian trio. This is where it gets a little more complex. Can you remind us how these three forces work together?
Think of it like this. Your id is that part of you, that impulsive part of you,
Okay.
that wants it all and wants it now,
Okay.
driven by pure desire. So let's say you walk past a bakery, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you smell those fresh-baked cookies.
Mm-hmm.
That's your id screaming, eat all the cookies.
I know that voice very well.
Right, we all do. But then you have your superego.
Okay.
That's your inner rule follower,
I get
the voice of reason, morality, societal expectations. It chimes in and says, hold on, you're on a diet. Eating an entire box of cookies is really not a good look.
So it's this constant battle between, pure indulgence on one hand and total restriction on the other. That sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. And that's where the ego steps in.
Okay.
The ego is the mediator,
Okay.
the negotiator, constantly trying to find that balance
Right.
between your id's desires and your superego's rules.
Okay.
One of Freud's key insights was that true happiness, it doesn't come from giving in to every impulse
Okay.
or from being overly restrictive.
Right.
It's about finding that middle ground, that
Yeah.
sweet spot,
Finding that balance.
where you can satisfy your desires without completely derailing your life.
So it sounds like a strong ego is key to navigating this whole internal tug-of-war.
Absolutely.
But how do we strengthen our ego and find that balance?
Well, that's where Freud gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Because he actually offers some surprisingly practical advice, and he focuses on two key areas of life, love and work.
Okay, now that doesn't sound so intimidating. Love and work. Those are things we can all relate to. So what did he say about them?
Freud recognized that we all have fundamental needs for both connection and purpose, right?
Right.
Love, in all its forms, it fulfills that need for intimacy and belonging. And meaningful work gives us a sense of accomplishment, a sense of contribution to something larger than ourselves.
You know what? That actually aligns with a lot of modern research, too.
It does.
Strong relationships and a sense of purpose, those are huge factors in overall well-being.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, didn't you say that Freud was a bit of a pessimist?
Yeah.
How does he reconcile love and work with this belief that true happiness is elusive?
That's where things get a little more complicated.
Right.
Freud also believed that suffering is inevitable.
Oh,
Life throws us curveballs, relationships have their challenges,
uh-huh.
work can be frustrating.
Right.
He wasn't advocating for some kind of naive bliss, where everything is perfect all the time. It was more about a resilient kind of happiness, something that can withstand life's ups and downs.
So it's about accepting limitations, not giving up on joy, but having, like, realistic expectations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where Freud's practical advice really comes in.
Right.
He didn't just leave us hanging with this idea of inevitable
Sure,
suffering.
there's more.
He offered a toolkit for building resilience and finding a deeper, more sustainable kind of happiness.
Okay, now this is what I'm talking about. Let's dive into that toolkit. What did Freud actually suggest we do to cultivate this kind of resilient happiness?
Well, one of his key recommendations was self-reflection.
Okay, self-reflection. That makes sense, but we're not talking about, like, casual daydreaming.
Oh, no, it's much deeper than that.
Okay.
Freud was really talking about understanding your motivations, your fears, those underlying like whys that drive your behavior.
So it's less about judging ourselves and more about kind of uncovering the roots of our actions and our feelings
Exactly. And Freud actually developed psychoanalysis. Right.
as a way to help people bring those hidden things to the surface.
That's fascinating.
Okay.
But how do we actually go about doing that? Do we all need to lie on a couch and talk about our dreams for years?
Well, that was Freud's method, but
Mm.
thankfully, there are more accessible approaches today.
Okay.
Journaling, meditation, mindfulness practices, all of these things can help cultivate that self-awareness
Mm-hmm.
that Freud was emphasizing.
I see.
Even just, taking time for honest reflection, checking in with yourself and asking, how am I feeling? What's going on beneath the surface can be incredibly powerful.
It's about becoming more attuned to our own thoughts and emotions and behaviors and understanding those internal forces that are at play, like those battles between the id and ego and superego that we were talking about.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And this self-awareness, it's crucial for making choices that align with our values, building healthier relationships,
Yeah.
and navigating life's challenges with more resilience. It's a path towards a more fulfilling and authentic kind of happiness. So it's not just about introspection, but also taking action based on what we learn about ourselves through that process.
Absolutely. Another tool in Freud's toolkit for resilient happiness is embracing a balanced lifestyle.
Okay.
And this goes back to those three forces we talked about, the id, ego, and superego. It's not about denying yourself pleasure or being overly strict. It's about finding that sweet spot where you can satisfy those id desires without completely ignoring the superego's wisdom.
Okay, so can you give us an example of what that balance might look like in everyday life?
Sure. Let's say your id is craving a big bowl of ice cream. Right.
Who is it?
Exactly. But your superego might remind you, hey, you're trying to eat healthier.
Right. Yeah.
So a balanced approach could be, having a smaller portion
Okay.
or opting for a healthier version of your favorite treat.
Yeah, I like that.
It's about finding a compromise that allows you to enjoy those pleasures in life without feeling guilty or jeopardizing your well-being.
So it sounds like finding balance is really about listening to all parts of ourselves, even the seemingly irrational ones,
Mm-hmm.
and making choices that honor both our desires and our long-term goals.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, Freud highlighted those internal battles,
Yeah.
but he also recognized the crucial role that external factors, like our relationships,
Yeah.
play in our happiness. He believed that strong, healthy relationships were absolutely essential for fulfilling those core needs for intimacy and belonging,
Makes sense.
leading to ultimately a greater sense of well-being.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
I mean, we are social creatures after all.
Yeah.
We thrive on connection. We thrive on support from others.
Absolutely.
But what about work?
Yeah.
We know Freud considered it, a key ingredient in this whole recipe for happiness.
Right.
But what exactly do we mean by meaningful work?
This is where things get really personal.
Yeah.
For Freud, meaningful work wasn't about chasing status or a big paycheck. It was about finding something that truly engages you,
Yeah.
something that aligns with your interests and values and allows you to contribute your talents in a way that feels fulfilling.
So it's about having a sense of purpose, feeling like you're making a difference, however big or small that might be. It's about using your your unique gifts, your talents, to make a positive impact on the world.
Exactly. And this idea of finding purpose through work, it's something that resonates so deeply with people today.
It really does, especially in a world where work can often feel disconnected from our values, from our
Yeah,
passions.
absolutely.
But we've talked about balance, we've talked about self-awareness, love, and meaningful work. Is there anything else in Freud's toolkit for this resilient happiness?
There's one more element, and it's arguably the most important: emotional resilience.
Okay.
This is where Freud's acceptance of the inevitability of suffering really comes into play.
That sounds challenging. How do we develop emotional resilience in the face of hardship?
It's about recognizing that pain is just, it's a part of life.
It's about learning to cope with those inevitable ups and downs without letting them completely derail us.
Okay.
It's about finding ways to bounce back from adversity stronger and wiser.
Easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Freud, he really believed in the power of reframing negative thoughts.
Okay.
Instead of getting stuck in that cycle of negativity, he encouraged people to look for the lessons
Yeah.
and the growth opportunities in those difficult experiences.
So it's about finding the silver lining, even when it feels impossible.
In a way, yes. It's about shifting our perspective and finding meaning in the midst of challenges.
Okay.
And, while that can be incredibly difficult, there are practical techniques that can help, like mindfulness practices and cognitive behavioral therapy techniques.
Right.
These tools can help us cultivate a sense of awareness and acceptance of our thoughts and emotions without judgment.
So it's about developing the inner strength to weather the storms of life without losing sight of our values and our goals. Precisely. And, while some of Freud's other ideas might seem outdated today, this emphasis on emotional resilience is perhaps more relevant than ever.
Especially with all the constant pressures and uncertainties that we face in the modern world.
Absolutely.
Like Freud is giving us a framework for navigating a world that can often feel so chaotic and overwhelming.
Yeah.
But is all this old school psychology stuff truly relevant to our lives today? I mean, some of his theories have been challenged or even debunked over the years.
That's a great question. And you're right, not everything Freud proposed holds up under modern scrutiny.
Okay.
But it's amazing how many of his core concepts, this idea of inner conflict, the importance of balance and acceptance, the potential for growth through suffering,
Yeah.
they resonate with what we know about human psychology today.
It's like he tapped into something so fundamental about the human experience that, transcends time and culture.
I think so.
Yeah.
Consider the world we live in today. The constant pressure to succeed, the curated perfection on social media, the relentless pace of life. I mean, all of this makes Freud's insights even more relevant.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, he offers a way to understand those internal battles, navigate our desires and our limitations, and find a more grounded, realistic happiness that can weather those storms.
So even though Freud wasn't exactly known for being like a beacon of optimism,
Right.
he actually offered a message of hope. He reminded us that we're not just at the mercy of our unconscious drives or the whims of fate. We actually have the power to understand ourselves, to make conscious choices, and to cultivate a more resilient approach to life.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with some final thoughts on how Freud's ideas can continue to challenge and inspire us today.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Freud and happiness.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. I mean, we went from the pleasure principle to the id, ego, and superego, and even...
Don't forget that emotional resilience.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Emotional resilience and finding meaning in work. It's funny. We discovered that Freud, well...
He wasn't all doom and gloom like some people think.
No, not at all. In fact...
He gave us a roadmap, really.
Yeah, for navigating, all the complexities of life.
And finding a deeper, more resilient kind of happiness.
Exactly. So before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier, how Freud's insights might be even more relevant now than they were back then.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the challenges we face today, in the modern world.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with these messages about success and, achieving perfection.
We're on all the time.
Yes. And it's exhausting.
It really is. And that's where Freud's ideas can help. They offer a way to find some grounding amidst all the chaos.
He encourages us to acknowledge that we're not going to be happy all the time.
Yeah.
And to accept that life is going to throw us those curveballs.
It's actually really liberating to let go of that expectation,
Huh.
that we should be blissful all the time.
It is. Because then we can start to appreciate the full spectrum of human emotion,
Yeah, and learn from our mistakes.
grow from challenges.
Find a more authentic kind of happiness that's not dependent on, external circumstances.
So it's about integrating those difficult experiences into how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness is so important, like we talked about before.
The more we understand ourselves, the better choices we can make.
Choices that align with our values and ultimately lead to a more fulfilling life.
It's like Freud was saying, become the captain of your own ship.
Don't let those unconscious forces steer you off course.
He might not have had all the answers.
But he gave us some pretty powerful tools for navigating life.
I like that. Powerful tools. And speaking of tools, I want to leave everyone with one final thought-provoking idea from Freud before we go.
Ooh, I like this part.
All right, so Freud said, one day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful.
Now, that might sound a little counterintuitive at first.
It does.
But think about it. It speaks to the power of growth and resilience.
That's a good point. So as you go about your week, I want you to reflect on a time when you learned and grew from a difficult experience.
What did you discover about yourself during that time? How did that challenge shape you into the person you are today?
Keep those questions in mind, and until next time, happy exploring.